Good morning and afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's 60-minute webinar titled Maximizing Client Acceptance of Your Firm's Technology Initiatives. This is Greg Pope with SurePrep. I am here mainly to get the housekeeping items out of the way, and then I'll hand it off to Octavian for the presentation. In terms of housekeeping, this is a listen-only webinar, which just means that you should be able to hear me. We can't hear your voices, but we do encourage questions. So if you have them, go ahead and type them into the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that you see on screen there. We'll answer as many questions as we can during the presentation. If there are too many questions to get to on today's call, we will follow up with you after the session. So one way or another, all questions will be answered. If after today's session you'd like to learn more about SurePrep or the products or services that we offer, go to sureprep.com, click on the Talk to Sales button, and fill out that short form, and somebody will follow up with you to get your questions answered or schedule a one-on-one demonstration if that's something that you want to do. We are offering CPE credit for today's session, so we have 4 polling questions today. The 4th one will be the very last thing that we do, so please make sure you stay till the end for that question. With the housekeeping out of the way, let me introduce Octavian Thomas. Octavian is one of SurePrep's regional sales managers. Although this presentation has some change management themes, Octavian is not a change management expert. He's been with SurePrep for 11 years, and he's worked with hundreds of firms who've implemented SurePrep's solutions and the solutions of other vendors. Thankfully, most of the firms that Octavian has worked with, most of our customers believe in proper planning and training. However, Octavian has seen some more stubborn firms believe that they could just sort of figure it out on their own without much training or planning. So Octavian does have a lot of experience in this area and has a very interesting perspective on it. So Octavian, why don't you take us through the agenda and the demonstration?
Of course. So, Greg, thank you so much for the intro, and I really appreciate everyone taking time today. So, just a couple quick things. The learning objectives, we're just going to focus on 2 main areas today, and I'll go through the agenda in a second here, but we want to look at how other industries have adapted technologies. Obviously, technology is here to stay, and for those of you that attend different webinars and association meetings, whatever it may be, the technology is always at the top of the line conversation. So we will focus on a few other industries so we understand how they're becoming efficient, and then we'll look at this 5-phase implementation approach that we've seen over the years as we've helped firms migrate. So first, we'll look at 3 main industries. We'll look at hotels, restaurant, and banks. We'll briefly talk about that. And then we have a 5-phase implementation approach that we'll get into a little bit more detail on to analyze, organize, implement, embrace, and embed. Hopefully, we'll have a little bit of time for some questions at the end, so we'll open it up for that. Again, you've got the polling questions, so make sure you are addressing those as we go through the process. So let's go ahead and get started. The first piece, we do have our first polling question, so we will pause and then we'll get into the actual presentation. So Greg, do you want to proceed with that first question?
Yeah, I just launched it. The question is, what tax software do you use to prepare individual tax returns or 1040s? You see the choices on screen there. If you use one of CCH's other products that's not listed there, you know, ATX, for example, don't select CCH, select other. If you don't prepare 1040s, select other. The question is pretty self-explanatory. We'll leave the question open for about another 30 seconds or so. Got 94% have voted, so got about 10 more seconds, and then I'll close the polling question, Octavian, and we'll go back to you.
Okay.
All right, the question is closed.
All right, Greg, thank you. So let's look real closely here at a few other industries that have adopted technologies, and then we'll migrate into the accounting industry. So obviously, our goal is to create a better client experience, and really technology has allowed us to do that over the years, and it's constantly evolving, which is nice because it can create more efficiencies in the process. But obviously, there's some different ways to adopt that and implementations, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So the first industry, if we look at the top three here, would be hotels, and I do think they've done a terrific job over the years in providing better client service, better interaction, and making the whole process more efficient. So if you think about your typical hotel, there might be different reasons why you book rooms at certain hotels. Maybe you like the chain, maybe you like the service, the rooms are clean, the locations, or whatever the case may be. But in the traditional method of doing reservations, and maybe some people still do this, you typically would have picked up the phone, you would call the hotel. At that point, you might be put on hold. There might be a situation where maybe it's difficult to hear because of the background noise or communication issues. So whatever the case may be, there was certainly some room for improvement in that industry. So a real good example, if you look at like the Marriott chains here, I think they're a really good example of how they've adopted technology. So not only can you do, of course, your reservations online and make it a little bit more efficient as far as streamlining the process of finding a room, making changes, and so on. But Marriott has even taken this technology piece to the next step. So in some cases, you can actually go into a Marriott hotel with your phone, and the phone becomes your key. So the application that you would load would allow you to bypass the entire front end process, which would be checking in at the front desk, getting your credit card information, your ID, answering questions, getting the key, and so on. So after a long trip now, Marriott rewards customers can go directly to their room, which is a nice benefit. So this is a good example of technology in the hotel industry, and I think they were very early adopters in this whole process. Next industry would be restaurants. And again, just like with the hotels, there are probably some reasons why you like a particular restaurant, be it their food, their service, and so on. But like the hotel industry, you have the same type of reservation process. Traditionally, you used to have to call in. Maybe they weren't open yet, so you'd get a voicemail, answering machine in most cases. Maybe the person answering had to put you on hold very loud because they're checking people in. So needless to say, there was definitely some room for improvement there. And a good example of an application here that made the process more efficient would be something like OpenTable. And what this allows you to do is just basically through an app, you can look at the food, you can check the menu out, you can make reservations, make changes very easily. So they've really improved the customer experience as far as getting people through the doors more efficiently. And really from a restaurant perspective, if you think about this, they're not having to pay someone to answer the phone and take reservations. So that person can now focus more on providing better customer service when the customers come in. So that would be the restaurant industry. And the last one that I would just kind of touch on, and again, these are all related to migrating to better technologies, would be the banking industry. And I would say from the CPA side, this is probably the closest scenario that I can show, banks and the process that they had and what they have now with the migration. So if you think about the traditional method of, let's say, depositing a check, you would have to fill out a slip. Many times you would, drive to the bank on a Saturday morning or during your lunch break. You have to wait in line. Once you got there, obviously there's some cost to the bank, and that was a very time-consuming process, not only for you, but now there have to be tellers in place, so they have to hire additional employees to handle the foot traffic. They have to have someone that would key in the deposits. Then they would put the paper slips in, the checks on stacks, scan everything in, incur the cost of storage, and so on. Obviously, it's a very laborious process. So bank applications have taken a very streamlined approach to where now you can do a lot of things right through an app. And really, if you think about the old way of doing things in the traditional method, the process probably sounds very familiar to what CPA firms are doing today. So in many cases with the 1040 client, the client receives a paper organizer in the mail, and sometimes they fill it out, sometimes they don't. They can mail the documents into you, and at that point, maybe they can hand deliver them just like they would have driven to the bank, for example. At that point, someone in your office had to take the time to do a number of different things. One, to process the documents, and then somebody would key in the information. Some firms have migrated over the years to automation technologies. Like in our case, we have the 1040 scan application, or there might be the ProSystem scan application out there, which help automate some of these data entry technologies. But the bottom line is it's a very laborious process today. So there had to be a better way. And I know I'm really oversimplifying the process because there are a lot of moving pieces in a particular workflow. But if you think of the sheer cost of the organizers that are going out, and we work with some firms that do thousands and thousands of returns, and they were doing paper organizers, or they may still be doing that. You've got the cost of paper, the toner, the envelopes, the stamps, the time that it takes. And then you have the cost of processing everything when you get everything from your clients. So for most firms, that may still be the way it's done, because traditionally things have moved fairly slow in the industry, and a lot more firms are now migrating to technology. So that's the key question here, which is, how can the 1040 process be improved for you and for your clients? And can we actually reduce costs while improving the experience for the 1040 clients? And obviously, if we can answer that question and accomplish that goal, there are a lot of benefits, just like other industries have seen, which is, reduced processing costs. There are increased speed and accuracy efficiencies. Reduced office size needs gives employees a lot more flexibility in these digital environments. And of course, at the core of all that, improved client satisfaction. So that's really where we want to focus today. In most cases, I would say as firms are implementing these new technologies, you've identified what we're going to put in, and it's very exciting. But most of the technologies that firms will implement are really invisible to the client. So if you think about changes that you as a firm have made over the years, you may have changed tax software. And again, that's an internal process. Your clients don't see that. You may have also looked at, for example, some sort of a practice management or document management system, again, invisible to the client. So for this meeting today, we want to take a little different approach, and I want you to think about implementing new technologies that your 1040 clients will also use. Okay, so this kind of change really requires careful client consideration, and really at the core, it requires a very solid internal process. So for this, we have an application called TaxCaddy, and I'll take a really quick high approach on this, and then Greg, I think after that we have one more polling question coming up. But TaxCaddy was designed specifically to address some of these challenges, the inefficiencies that a tax professional would see in gathering documents, in the way that they can communicate with the clients, and of course, at the core of it, giving the taxpayer a much easier process to deliver these documents in a timely fashion to the CPAs, so they can start processing earlier, they can have more complete documents at the beginning of season, and so on. So TaxCaddy has two pieces, and we'll show you the website in a little bit here in case you want to get a little bit more information. But from the tax professional side, think about what really needs to be delivered to the client. So since there's such a small hit ratio on organizers being filled out, maybe industry averages, 15 to 20% on the high end, actually clients filling it out, getting it to you in a timely fashion, and actually filling it out correctly. So from the tax professional side, there are certain documents that we want our clients to have. So we have things like engagement letters, maybe consent forms, other documents that we want our clients to review and possibly sign, questionnaires. We want to be able to provide a list of the items that the client had last year, meaning here are all of the documents that were in the tax return last year, the pro forma list, and we want to be able to easily communicate. So TaxCaddy allows for this interaction where it allows the taxpayer or the tax professional to very quickly connect with their taxpayer. They can load whatever type of documents that they want for the taxpayer to review, and then they can send this invitation to their taxpayer. Once the taxpayer connects, they then have the ability to look into the different documents. They can sign, they could review, they can complete the questionnaires. Matter of fact, this TaxCaddy piece, for convenience, they can even, clients or taxpayers can actually link up to their financial institutions, so the documents are pulled into TaxCaddy the day that they're released. They can use their phone to take a quick snapshot of the documents that they receive in the mail. And because there's an instant messaging piece in here, they can instantly communicate with their CPA. So this is a type of application, like in the other industries, efficiencies for the client. We wanted to create something that was easier for the client to communicate with their tax professional. So Greg, I think you have another polling question. If I may, I'll turn that over to you real quick.
Yeah, I do. And before I launch the question, we just want to mention, you're talking about TaxCaddy as a replacement for the traditional paper organizer that the vast majority of firms still send out to their clients. We've, in the last 10, 15 years in this industry, seen a couple of attempts at replacing that paper organizer. And so we've got a question for each of them. First one, let me go ahead and launch it, relates to online organizers. This is something that I remember seeing for the first time maybe 15 years ago. And so the question is, if your firm uses online organizers, or maybe maybe you used it, tried it and it wasn't that successful, let us know what your client adoption rate was. We've seen, based on the firms that we've talked to, really abysmal adoption, generally under 10%, and sometimes in the 4, 5, 6% range. The next polling question we'll get to in maybe 10 minutes or so relates to portals. Keep this question open for about another 10 seconds or so. Looks like about 2/3 don't use online organizers or never have. About 17% selected in the 0 to 10% range, and then single digits in the other ranges. Let me go ahead and close the question and hand it back to you, Octavian.
All right. So I think that's a very fair analysis. The adoption rate obviously has been, fairly low in that market, and that's why we looked at creating a solution that maybe adds a little bit more efficiency to the overall process. So now that you've identified a new technology, the key question then is, how can you ensure you maximize the client acceptance? And that's what we'll focus on today, because it really is tempting to think that your firm can acquire a technology solution, implement it, and the benefits just roll out. That's really not the case. It's just not going to happen. There's a lot of planning that needs to happen. There has to be a good executive team kind of leading that charge. So leading the firm through the transformation to a new technology really is a process, a change process, and one that needs to be managed just like any other project, as you're looking at your firm's critical success. So maximizing the acceptance, we've kind of broken this down to about 5 different steps. So we'll look at these in a little bit more detail to analyze, organize, implement, embrace, and embed. So let's start with the first one here, which is the analyze phase. So first, just a little bit of history on how we typically work internally when we do implementations for our solutions. And I think this relates very well to what we're going to talk about today. So part of our challenge, especially as new technologies come on, is to really identify a solid team that's going to lead the charge. And part of this is to have somebody at the lead that really understands the process, has a very clear message that they can relay down. They have a good support group behind that. So the first step would be to really identify a project sponsor. So since in this case we're talking about your 1040 clients, a really good example of this would be maybe a tax partner would be a very appropriate project sponsor. So the strong leadership in this case is very, very essential. And this 1040 project needs really a single individual with a crisp vision and direction. The project sponsor typically owns the budget, and they can make a lot of the decisions around the moving pieces with this project. So very critical to have a project sponsor. In our implementation, we call that like a lead champion, and we do have a project sponsor, obviously, that would be involved in the process. So from there, the next step then, once we've identified the project sponsor, is to create what's called a project charter. So an essential milestone in the analyze phase is really clarifying the management expectations, right? So this begins when your firm creates a project charter for this new technology. So really what that is, a charter is just a business plan. What's going to happen from point A to point B and all the moving pieces in between, because there is, an investment that's being made. So, that requires appropriate due diligence. So, why is the firm committing money to this project? What's going to happen during the transition? Why take the risk? So there are different ways to kind of assess and measure the success of one of these transitions. So let me give you just a few examples. So as you're looking at these implementations, maybe the goal or the vision is to first, let's say, reduce costs. So earlier we talked about the pure costs of, sending out paper organizer, the time investment, and so on. What if our goal was to reduce those costs on paper, toner, envelopes, collating, receiving, and everything by 50%? How would that impact your bottom line? What if another option would be, or another success ratio is the client acceptance rate. So right now, as Greg mentioned, we saw from the poll, the client acceptance rate on traditional methods of paper organizers, electronic organizers, these other methods had a very low adoption rate. So what if we can get 50% of our client base to adopt this new technology and make their process more efficient? In turn, the benefit to that, and perhaps another goal would be, now we can start preparing returns significantly earlier, like maybe 2 to 3 weeks earlier, because the documents are coming in faster. So a little bit later in the presentation today, Greg is going to share some statistics, but perhaps the biggest indicator that something is working is if you're polling your clients and you're running surveys, perhaps the client satisfaction and the feedback exceeds 90%, meaning that 90% will say that the way we're doing it now is better than the way we were doing it before. And we'll come back to that in just a little bit as we share some of our findings with the client base. Okay, so that would be creating the project charter. From there, the third step is really just defining the value proposition. And again, the value proposition, if you think about this, when you distill all the critical success indicators that you've identified in the project charter, right? And you narrow it down to what's called the value proposition. So ideally, the partners will do this together so that everyone is on board. And the value proposition, if you think about what the definition for that is, it's really the core elevator speech. Why are we doing this? It's a 1-minute conversation piece as to why we're implementing this new technology with our clients. And when the time comes to communicate the vision to the staff and to the clients, everybody has a clear vision and a consistent message why we're doing this. So it's really important to really define that value proposition and understand how to communicate this to your clients and to your internal staff, because as we said earlier, you can't just expect to roll something out and magically it's going to evolve. There's a lot of work here and a lot of support from the top. So there are maybe two different considerations in how to create a value proposition. You can do an internal proposition that would be for your staff, or you can do an external one, which would be for the client-facing side, or you can do kind of a mixed, internal slash external message. So something like that might be as simple as, we're implementing this new technology to automate and streamline our process and provide better client service, which is what we're all trying to do here to retain our clients, grow our client base, get more referrals. So the bottom line is we're trying to provide better client service. If you're looking at the internal messages, maybe that's focused more around, look, we're looking to streamline our process and of course, be able to provide better client service so we can focus more of our efforts towards providing consultation services and doing what we're really, in this industry to do. The client version, of course, has to just be filtered down to, we're doing this so we can improve our relationship and your communications with us. Okay. So that's the value proposition. The next step then is within this first analyze step is with any new 1040 technology, especially as you're looking at this a little bit differently. You've implemented this technology, you've tested it internally and to some degree, but have you really done the due diligence to really see what this looks like from the client's perspective? So I think when we talk about analyzing the client impact, our recommendation is once you put something like this in place, the team members should really create test accounts to gain an understanding of what the experience will be like for your clients once they go live. And by taking a close look at the impact of the initiative on clients, the project sponsor will also be able to discover vital inputs to the plan of action. So a lot of times when these technologies are rolled out, the internal staff don't in many cases do the due diligence of actually testing it from the client view, and that's what we're encouraging here. And this might impact the way that you roll things out. If you have the internal experience, you can kind of segregate your rollout, meaning that if you have a first year rollout, for example, that might be maybe to the younger group, the more technology savvy group. And then phase two of that might be to the group that maybe wasn't quite as quick to adopt in the past. So this will indicate, as to the internal feel and potentially how you're going to roll out the applications. So do analyze that client impact. I think that's a very critical piece to the overall phase. Okay, so that again is very high level. Bottom line is just make sure you have a clear vision and a clear understanding of where you're going from point A to point B, which really kind of moves us into the next step here, which is the organize phase. So as I mentioned earlier, part of what we do in our implementations, and I've been involved in hundreds of these implementations over the years, and the successful implementations typically have a solid defined team. So collaboration within that team is really, really critical. So the project sponsor being at the top, and we've identified that as potentially like the tax partner, and they have a clear vision which can be rolled down. The project manager, which is kind of in the second tier here, really owns the job. So this would be somebody that's a lot more hands-on a day-to-day. In this case, maybe a tax manager that people can filter questions through. And then you've got your process champions. So just like in our implementations, typically we'll have designated champions for the different categories of whatever that workflow might be. So there might be, for example, a lead champion. We have a backup champion. There might be somebody as an admin champion, a reviewer champion, a preparer champion, just so there is one key person in each category that can really identify what needs to be done at that step. And the staff, which is the team members down at the bottom here, can filter up and ask these questions because these folks will have a clear defined vision and they could roll that vision down to the rest of the staff. So collaborating with the project team. The next step then is in the organize phase would be to really create and communicate the vision to your clients. So you really have to build this. There has to be a very clear and defined picture of what the process will look like and how it will benefit the firms and clients. The project team needs to be equipped to build and communicate common vision to gain buy-in, both from the firm staff, so you've got your core group here, and then you've got your clients, which we're trying to get acceptance to these new technologies, and it's an ever evolving process. So the more we can define and organize our vision in our plan, the clearer the communication will be and the better the avenue will be for your clients to adopt these technologies. So when you're thinking about the organization and creating the structured implementation plan, there really are a lot of moving pieces to this. And if you think of the overall workflow, the bulk of the work isn't necessarily in pushing the button and rolling this out. The bulk of the work comes in the preparation and the building of the structure internally before the rollout. And that's what tends to make firms successful. If they have a solid plan in place, they know what everybody's role is, they have defined parameters for each step of the way. The vision then becomes solid when you create this implementation plan and you roll it out to your clients. So the firm goals are now clear. It's time to lay out that structured implementation plan, but there are really a lot of questions that go around this piece. So let me just kind of give you a few examples. So in regards to the rollout, when will the 1040 clients be invited, for example, to download this mobile app, to create their account, to connect with their CPAs? What resources will you need? When will you have to train staff on the new workflow? Who will respond to client questions? Who will provide technical support to the clients? Will the firm provide support? Will the technology vendor provide support? Who will do each step of the way? So really, there's a lot that goes into this planning, which obviously we can't get into every nut and bolt of it, but I can't stress enough how over the years, the successful implementations we've seen had a very clear, defined vision, and they had answers to all the questions that needed to be addressed. They knew where the resources were, and it was very easy to roll this process out. So answers to each of these questions at the bottom line need to be very clear. They have to be concise. And now when the clients are calling you, there won't be a confusion as to what it is and how to do it. So I want to jump to real quickly here to our tax caddy piece, since we did a quick introduction to that. We do provide resources for the taxpayer. And I think this is an important piece because a lot of firms will ask us, well, will we need to take all these calls from our clients? If there are technical questions, who's going to support that? We do have resources for that. So the TaxCaddy website at taxcaddy.com is really a dedicated resource specifically for the client. It gives them a quick introduction to what it is. It also defines, what the process is, how they actually interact with the CPA. It also talks about the security measures. Obviously, security is a very important piece. There's two-factor authentication. There's all sorts of things that go in behind the security of these technologies. And the bottom line is, how is it being used, and can I use it on my different devices? So the answer is yes. So there are some very nice basic questions that are addressed at a high level here. But on the detail side, we also provide a help center that's available to the clients. And within this help center, they have all sorts of resources on getting started. When you get into a lot of the Q&As, there's a knowledge base piece here. There's also, within this process, there is a community that they can join, so they can talk to other, TaxCaddy users and ask questions. And if they run into some sort of a technical challenge, they can submit a request. We do have a dedicated support team that addresses this. So I wanted to bring this to light during the presentation because this is an important piece of the overall process, which is, how am I able to, communicate with my clients, answer questions, and so on. So there is a dedicated resource. Along with that, part of what we try to do, because the questions come up, is to like when to roll things out and so on. So we do provide sample emails, brochures that are available for distribution, and all sorts of materials. This would be an example of one of our brochures here that just basically explains that can be distributed to the client base. So that's just, again, if you have a few minutes, taxcaddy.com is a good resource just to see it from the taxpayer side. So with that, Greg, we do have another polling question. Why don't we go ahead and address that?
Yeah, let me launch the polling question. The previous one asked about online organizers. This one is we're asking about portals. Let me go ahead and launch that. Question is, if your firm uses a portal, what percentage of your 1040 clients use it to deliver documents to you? So we're not asking about business clients, and we're really not asking about if you use a portal to maybe deliver the final return to your clients. That's not what we're asking about. We're asking about the percentage of clients that actually use your portal to deliver documents to you. And while we keep this open, I want to just go back to the previous slide that you were looking at, Octavian. There was a number of questions that you had. When will the client be invited to download the mobile app? Who will provide technical support? Another question is who will sell this to the taxpayer, right? I mean, we're talking about firms implementing technology that their clients will also use, but it's the firm that has made the decision to use something like TaxCaddy. And so the resources that you just showed, taxcaddy.com, the help center, the brochure, all of the resources that we provide to our customers so that they can use those to sell the idea to their clients are really, really important. And, with this portal question on screen, one of the reasons that we have seen also very low adoption for 1040 clients is because the portals are not designed with the taxpayer in mind. They're designed with the firm in mind. And so, we took a different approach with TaxCaddy. We knew that this idea needed to really be sold to the taxpayer. The taxpayer's really got to believe that there are some benefits for them before they adopt it. Let me go ahead and close this question and go back to you.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Greg. It's there's a process to this, and a lot of questions. I'm sure we'll have some questions as we go through this, but one thing I would point out as we talk about the next step here, which is the implement phase. There has to be a good, clear plan for executing this. And we do get a lot of questions as we implement, like when should we start rolling this out? How should we roll it out to our clients? What kind of communications should we have? So, with the planning complete and really kind of understanding the workflow, this next phase here really has to be solid from the top down on the execution. So ultimately the staff will follow the lead of their supervisors, and if management is committed to the transition, staff will make the effort obviously to create work through the new workflow. So the communication with the clients, as I was stating earlier, that's a very common question as to when should we be rolling this out and how should we be communicating. So there are a lot of different ways to do that. Now, our recommendation, of course, is the earlier or the sooner the better. If you're going to roll these things out, at least give your clients a heads up of what will be coming. So ideally, you should have a target date for full rollout. But before that, there's no reason why there shouldn't be some collaboration with your clients, whether it's through monthly communications or maybe specific notification that goes out early in the summer, for example, really telling the clients that, hey, on this date, we're going to be putting in some new technologies that you'll have the ability to use. Here's why. So we have that clear message stated. And then you give them some resources where they can actually do a little bit of research so they can prep for that rollout. And And as you move closer to that process and executing the plan, you'll send a sequence of emails until eventually you'll send out that invitation. So preparing your clients for the change really is crucial in this. And remember, you're not just acquiring new software, you're really transforming the way that you collaborate with your clients, because technology obviously has the capability to do a lot more than old processes, and that's why people adopt these efficiencies. So executing the plan, very critical in the implementation process, and then of course implementing the new technology. So once the technology is the button is clicked and we're going live, at this point, the clients will be able to set up their accounts. And of course, they will have questions. So, thankfully, if you did your proper preparation, all of those items are identified. We know exactly who to go to, what the resources are, and you're able to fully implement the rollout and address questions as they come in, because you will get them. And they'll come from all sorts of different directions and all sorts of different flavors. And if you're not prepared to address that, chances are you're going to have a much harder time with implementation. That's for any new technology. I think that's just a given. So the implement phase, obviously, as I said, most of the time is spent in the earlier phases and the preparation. There's a lot of work involved there. This is just kind of executing that. So you should have a very clear vision by this point as to how things are going to roll out and the time phase to that. Okay, so we've implemented. We've got our clients to adopt this technology. We've got a good user base now, and the key to this long-term sustaining this project is really managing the change after the implementation. So by the end of the first season, typically you'll have a very good feel of how the application will work, the challenges that are there. You'll have, your first taste of the expected ROI on how this process will work. And at the bottom of this, leadership must continue focus on just creating more and more efficiencies around this process. So let me give you an example from our internal implementation. So part of what we do when we partner up with a new firm is we will do an implementation workflow process. So we assign a consultant to the firm. That consultant works with the firm, with their champion group, to really define the workflow, diagram everything out, create plans around it. So we have a very clear vision of what's going to happen from point A to point B. But that's only part of the picture. So we roll out the technology, but for us to really get a good feel of what's going on at the next phase, meaning how was this adopted? What are the challenges that are happening? Post-peak season, we typically do a detailed meeting where we regroup with our clients, and we'll ask them, where were the challenges? Let us talk about where we can assist you, because we're looking to morph that process into something that's going to be really efficient specifically for that firm. And that's really where sustaining the change comes in. You have to have future interaction. You have to constantly gather feedback, not only from your clients as to how the technology performed and what changes they would like, what did they like most about that, but also gathering information internally. I think that's real critical because your user base and your adoption rate is going to be strongly dependent on how your internal folks adopt to this. And we've seen large scale adoptions because everybody was on board, and then we've seen situations where there was a lot of resistance internally, so the overall process may not be quite as successful. So Greg actually is in charge of doing a lot of these surveys, as we solicit feedback, as we're constantly trying to enhance our processes. And in turn, I'd like to, Greg, if it's okay, I'll turn it over to you real quick here. And maybe you can talk through just a few of these slides on some of the feedback that we were getting, because if you do have a good rollout and this is a successful process, feedback like this should be common. And this is what we're seeing from our piece. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, thanks. First thing, actually, I want to point out, you were talking earlier about client adoption. So let's imagine a firm that has, prepares 1,000 1040s. The firm, can invite all 1,000 clients to use TaxCaddy, but not all 1,000 are going to use it. If we think back to the banking example that you were talking about earlier, with new mobile technologies, you can, with your bank's mobile phone app, deposit a check by essentially taking a picture of it, and there are a ton of benefits to the banking customer and the bank if you do it that way. The bank doesn't require that you use that. There are still plenty of people. My mom definitely, drives to the bank and delivers checks that way. People still do that. So you'll have, some clients that are maybe don't want to adopt the new technology, which is fine. For those, you can still send out the paper organizer. I think this also speaks to the timing of the implementation. You want to do this as early in the year as possible so you can, prepare your clients for it, which could take several weeks or maybe even a couple of months. Then give them time to, download the app, create their accounts, and give you time to identify the clients that have not used it so that all right, here are the ones that we need to send the paper organizer to in January. So, as Octavian mentioned, one of the things that we did after this most recent tax season was send out a survey to all of our TaxCaddy users. This went out to taxpayers now, not the tax professional. This went out to taxpayers. And we asked, essentially, how was your experience? This was new for you. How did it go? So what you're seeing on screen is one of many, literally hundreds of quotes that we got from taxpayers. This one I thought was interesting. TaxCaddy made the process less stressful. It was easy to upload my documents and message my tax professional. And I was less stressed about tax time because I had started organizing documents earlier, so everything was done. Interesting, feedback. This was this was someone who used TaxCaddy for the first time this last tax season, and based on her feedback, it was a much better experience than the paper organizer. So, Octavian, go ahead and go to the next slide. Here's just another quote. TaxCaddy made the tax prep process easier. It was so easy to use that it required little thought on my part. I could concentrate on preparing the reports my tax preparer needed. So another interesting perspective. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This one, very simple and straightforward. Easy to use. Loved it. I would be surprised if anybody had this sort of a response to receiving the paper organizer in the mail. I used to go to my mailbox and open it and find that and feel a little bit of dread, like I had a couple of hours of homework to do. This is the last slide that we want to show that we got from this survey. But one of the questions we asked was, by offering technology options like TaxCaddy, does that demonstrate that your tax professional wants to improve your, experience or service as a client? 97% said yes. So, really an overwhelmingly positive response from taxpayers. Octavian, can you go to the SurePrep website and go to the TaxCaddy page?
Yep, give me 1 second here.
For everybody on the phone, if you're interested in seeing more of these TaxCaddy taxpayer quotes, go to the SurePrep website, like Octavian is doing right now. Go to the software menu and then the TaxCaddy page. If you scroll down towards the bottom of the page, you'll see a section that says, "What are taxpayers saying about TaxCaddy?" You click on that green button and you can see all of the quotes that we received.
You don't want to go through each one of these, Greg?
No, let's not do that.
Yeah, and there are definitely pages and pages of these. This is a really good success indicator, with the rollout. So go ahead, Greg. Is there anything else you wanted to cover on the surveys?
No, that was it.
Okay, perfect. So the last phase, and obviously these are the kind of results, we want all the firms to experience. Will there be some bumps along the way? Absolutely, but it's just so critical to have that strong plan in place. I know this is a kind of a high level type of a meeting, but implementation is just so critical to the overall rollout. And I'm sure everybody on the phone has had different technologies that they've implemented within the firm. They've had different workflows and structures built and so on. And hopefully the majority of the people had, that strong leadership just kind of driving that train. But really the last phase is, if you think about this, would be the embed phase. And what does that really mean? So a key indicator of organizational maturity and successful change management is when the new system really becomes the way that we do business. And it was interesting, I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and there was a speaker up there, and they were sharing a story, like an analogy of, what you should be doing when you're adopting things. So in the old days, when countries would go to war, they would, drive their ships or sail their ships all the way up onto the shore, and they would just have all of their warriors get off the boats, and the leaders would stay behind. They would burn the boats. So there was really no way out. So this really became an all or nothing type of a proposition. So really, when you get to that phase of the embed, it's so important that this really becomes the way that you guys do business. And like Greg said, there may be some offshoots because not everybody's going to adopt at the same rate or at the same click. But the bottom line is, moving forward and having leadership just kind of follow through and keep enhancing the process is going to be really critical to making this a permanent solution to the firm. So with that, these would be the different steps. I'm going to just show a couple quick things here. If you do have more questions around any of these applications, or if you want to talk to one of our folks around TaxCaddy, on our website, there's a little button that says Talk to Sales. You're welcome to click that at sureprep.com. We'll get back to you, and then we'll set up a time where we could address some more questions in detail. We do realize these are, high-level webinars, so we can't get to every single bullet point in detail within the process. But we will, Greg, why don't we just open it up for a few questions, and then keep in mind we do have one more polling question. So hang on the line for another couple minutes, and we'll address whatever questions we have.
Yeah, we've got a few questions from the audience. I just wanted to mention one thing that we, often hear from customers is, we can't imagine going back to the way we used to prepare returns. And your analogy, if they're burning the ships, there's definitely no going back. So let me get to the first audience question. What exactly do you recommend we send to clients, and when should we send it?
Okay. So there are different items that we have available. So if somebody does partner up with us, we do have different sample letters that we can provide. We do have brochures that could be sent out to your clients. But more importantly, is when these things need to go out. So part of the successful implementation would be to give clients a heads up as soon as possible. So the sooner the better. Maybe do this in different phases as far as rolling out the communications. Looking forward, we're going to be implementing these new technologies, and then of course state your vision statement there, which would be we're looking to create more efficiencies. So don't wait until the last minute. Start early. And get the communications out through a series of, be it emails or correspondence that you have, and then as you get closer to that rollout, make sure that you're really defining when the client should be expecting a particular invitation or communication. So there are materials that we do have available.
Okay. Question: If I don't use tax software that is integrated with TaxCaddy, can I still use it?
Yes, so let's first define the tax software that TaxCaddy integrates with. So part of what TaxCaddy does and what SurePrep does, we integrate with the major tax solutions out there. So the CCH solutions, then you've got UltraTax, Go System, Lacert, and all three different CCH solutions. So part of what our applications will do is they'll pull in what's called a document request list. In other words, the pro forma list directly from the tax software. If you're not using one of the supported tax software packages, you can still use TaxCaddy, for example, but it will not have that document request list or that pro forma list. You can still send all the documentations. You can still do all the communications with your clients. They can still send you whatever documents you're requesting, but you will not have that document request list. And that's part of the beauty of the way TaxCaddy operates, is that once the documents are gathered, it can streamline directly into the other automation services.
Okay. Last question from the audience, and then we'll launch the last polling question.
Sure.
Audience question is, how long does it generally take to implement a solution like this?
That's a great question, and that really can vary. So depending on the champion team, again, that's going to be a real critical factor. But I can speak from the implementations that we've done, and we've seen fairly streamlined processes that may take just several weeks, and that might be the design phase, and then we've got the fine-tuning phase, the rollout phase, and so on. It might take several weeks. We've also seen firms take several months. And it really depends on how ready the internal staff is to roll this out and adopt. With that being said, that's why we try to preach the sooner the better, especially with these rollouts and implementations, because you want to have at least that workflow clearly defined, and then when it's time to push the button for rollout, it just becomes a much smoother process. So the simple answer to your question is, we've seen firms do it very efficiently within a few weeks, and then we've seen firms do it in a few months. Really depends on the internal structures of the of the firms.
Okay. Okay. And just to reiterate, one of the things that I mentioned earlier, I think one benefit to doing it as early as possible is that it gives the clients, time to essentially identify themselves as the ones who are going to adopt it and the ones who are not.
Right.
We have just a couple of minutes left, so let me launch the last polling question, Octavian.
Sure.
Question is, how many 1040 tax returns do you process annually? Straightforward question. We'll leave it open for another minute, and while we do that, as Octavian mentioned earlier, if you'd like to learn more about TaxCaddy or any of SurePrep's solutions, click on the Talk to Sales button on SurePrep.com. There are a couple of questions that we're not going to be able to get to, but we will follow up with you. Thank you, Octavian, and thank you, everybody, for attending. We hope you enjoy the rest of your day. I'll go ahead and leave this polling question open for about another 10 seconds or so.
Well, I want to thank everyone for the time. So do not hesitate to contact us with additional questions. And Greg, thank you for hosting the questions and the slides.
All right. Thanks, everyone.